Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I'm back again today with another video. Today I'm going to be discussing basically my picks for the All-Star game in this upcoming All-Star game season, which is upon us very quickly. And I basically just want to run through who I think should get in and maybe a little bit about why I think they should get in and maybe talk about some of the people that are snubs on my list and why those guys didn't get in and just some of that stuff. So pretty straightforward and let's get into it. So I'm going to start with the Eastern Conference All-Stars. Uh, no reason why really, just because. Okay, so I'll go through the starters first, then the reserves, and then I will talk about the snubs. Just to clarify, just so you understand the formatting of how people are chosen, there's 12 spots on the All-Star team for each conference. Now they don't actually play East versus West anymore because they think it's too unbalanced. So they do sort of like here are the Eastern All-Stars, here are the Western All-Stars. Now we're gonna do like a playground schoolyard pick type of thing. But there still is like an Eastern Conference team initially and a Western Conference team initially, and 12 spots from each conference open. So they're in a typical starting lineup. You know, there's two guards, two forwards, and a center. But in the NBA, they changed it to just two backcourt players, aka guards, and three front court players, which could be either a center or forwards. They basically did this because they found, like about 2 years ago, there's a lot more talented forwards and centers in the league. So you could start like three good forwards instead of like two good forwards, a good center but not a great center, and then have to have a really good player come off the bench. Instead, they can just start basically whoever they want. Um, so it's front court players, not power forward, center, and small forward. But besides that, there is two guard spots in the starting lineup, three front court spots in the starting lineup. Then you have three guard spots off the bench, and then you've got four front court spots off the bench, which adds up to 12 total. Um, so the easiest way for me to do this was think of like two starting lineups, which adds up to 10, and then just like one backcourt player after that and one front court player after that. And so same goes for the West, same type of setup. 12. Um, you've got five guards and seven front court players. Okay, so to start with for the East, and also stuff like it doesn't matter if it's like two point guards in a starting lineup or three small forwards, because as I just said, the only way they distinguish is guard and front court player, or backcourt and front court player. So it doesn't matter if positions overlap. So in my Eastern Conference starting lineup, I have Kyrie Irving and Kemba Walker as the guards. Kyrie's doing really well this season, averaging a career high in assists, along with around 24 points a game on good shooting numbers. And Kemba Walker's averaging 25 points, which is a career high, and he's leading Charlotte to what will probably be a playoff berth. And he's basically just having his career year, which is perfect timing right before his contract is up. Next at the front court slots, I have Giannis Antetokounmpo. Sorry if I butchered the name, but I usually just call him Giannis because that's easier. And then I have Kawhi and then Embiid. So I do in fact actually have a center in this slot in Embiid. But at Giannis and Kawhi, I think those two are pretty easy. They're the number one and two. They're on the number one and two teams in the East, and they're both like the MVP frontrunners most likely. So I have them as those two spots. And then Embiid is better than anybody else you could slot in here in the East. He's a primetime player, very good, of course, and he's averaging, I think, 27 and 13 this year, or 26 and 13 this year, so that's amazing. And he's leading Philly to home court advantage in the first round, which is always good. So I have him in there in the starting lineup. As far as Eastern Conference reserves, for the guard spots, I have Ben Simmons and Victor Oladipo as my two guards there. Okay, and then the third one is Bradley Beal. So my three guard spots for the East are Ben Simmons, Victor Oladipo, and Bradley Beal. Bradley Beal is averaging a career high, basically 25 points a game on decent shooting numbers. I think like 38% from three and like 48% from the field, if I'm not mistaken. And then Ben Simmons is like he's shooting like 58% from the field or something like that. Of course, they're all shots in the paint and drives, but that's all right. And then he's averaging 16 and I want to say like 9 assists a game and 9 rebounds a game, or maybe it's 8 assists a game and 9 rebounds a game. Either way, very impressive, very triple-double like numbers, helping to orchestrate the Philadelphia offense and helping them to be a very successful team in the Eastern Conference thus far. So I obviously have him in there. And then Victor Oladipo, he's having more of a down year. He's only averaging like 19 points on 42% shooting from the field and like 32% shooting from three-point land. He's averaging the same, like I think like 5 rebounds and like 4 assists a game, which is like okay. But they're the 3 seed and he's the best player, so that's why I have him in there. Now front court spots is where this gets pretty interesting. I have, let's see here. So this is a combination of both centers and power forwards and small forwards. And so just to clarify, Jimmy Butler technically is a small forward on Philadelphia now, so he's being classified as a forward in this case. So I have Jimmy Butler in there. I have Andre Drummond, Blake Griffin, and Nikola Vucevic. Nikola Vucevic is averaging 21 and 12 on really good shooting numbers, so that's why I have him in there. He's having a career year. Blake Griffin is averaging 26 points a game, 8 rebounds, shooting 48% from the field, which is his highest percentage in like 5 years. And then also he's shooting 36% from 3, taking 7 threes a game, which is really impressive. He's also averaging, I think, 5.5 assists a game, which is very impressive for a power forward who's 6'10" to do. So he's having a fantastic year for himself, so I have him in there. And then Andre Drummond is averaging something like 17 or 18 points a game, along with I think like 16 or 17 rebounds a game. So that's obviously very impressive. He's the league's leading rebounder right now, so I have him in there. It may seem really weird that the Pistons have 2 All-Stars in here, but really the reason that they do is they have really those 2 guys and absolutely nothing else. Everybody else on their team plays like a fringe 10th man on any roster. They're really talentless besides these 2 guys. That's not to knock Ish Smith or Reggie Jackson, although yes, they can find spots on other teams if they had to, but really the whole team besides these 2 guys has played pretty badly. Okay, and then obviously Jimmy Butler, he's putting up his typical 21, 22 points a game, decent shooting numbers, pretty good defense, I suppose. So he's on there as well. It's really weird that he's a forward on this roster, though. I checked with NBA.com and they were listing him as small forward, so he has to be a front court player, which is odd. As for snubs for the East, my main snubs are Kyle Lowry and Khris Middleton. There really aren't that many guys to snub in the East just because the East is so devoid of talent. But Kyle Lowry, he's averaging 14 points a game, actually a little bit under 14. He's like 13.8, and then he's got 9 assists a game. He's all right. He's setting a career high in assists, and he's helping facilitate the Toronto offense, which there is something to be said for taking a step back from yourself and just helping your team play well. But at the same time, his personal numbers are pretty bad. He's shooting like 41% from the field and like 31 and 32% from 3, and he's still taking a good amount of shots per game. So his shooting numbers are very bad for himself, and his points have dropped. His assists are up, so I had to include him in here. And Toronto is, I think, the 1 or the 2 seed. It kind of changes day to day between them and Milwaukee, but I have him on here basically because of his team success and because he's sacrificing to improve his team. Okay, and then Khris Middleton, he's having a pretty good year. He's averaging, I think, 17 points a game, 38% from the three-point line, like 43% from the field. Now, if he was just shooting it a bit better, because he's basically a poor man's Klay Thompson, so if he was shooting it better, I could put him into the All-Star game, like, say, over Bradley Beal. But his shooting numbers aren't as great as I thought they would be. If he was striking something like 46% from the field, 42% from the three-point land, then maybe I'd put him in. But 38% is actually a little bit lower than I would have expected, and 43% is quite a bit lower than I would have expected from the field. So, and again, I'm putting him on here basically because of his team's success. They're like the 1 or the 2 seed in the East, depending on the day, so he deserves some recognition as the second best player on that team. But ultimately, his on-court performance hasn't quite been what it should be this year, really. Now transitioning over to the Western Conference, again, same old thing. Starting lineup, 2 guards, doesn't matter which position the guards are, and then 3 front court players, as vague as that is. So here you go. My starting lineup for the West is Steph Curry, James Harden, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis. Pretty straightforward. I don't feel like there's much explanation needed here. I think Steph's averaging like 29 points a game. James Harden's averaging 36 points a game on insane usage rate. LeBron's averaging 27, 7 and 7. Durant is averaging like 28, 7 and 5, and then Davis I think is averaging like 28 and 12. So I think it's a pretty clear cut that these guys are supposed to be the starters in the West. Really not much to say there about that. It seems like there are so many great players in the West that there should be more like debate, but these guys have really set themselves apart, I think, this year in particular. And it's just kind of clear that they're a cut above the rest. Okay, so moving on to the reserves for the West. The reserve guards I have for the West. This is probably the section where it gets the most contentious among these, like who I picked and who I left off the All-Star team. So if you're offended, I apologize. You can let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you guys think of this whole list and whether you agree or disagree. It'd be interesting to hear and discuss. So let me know below after you watch the entirety of the video. Okay, so for the Western Conference All-Star reserves for guards, I have Russell Westbrook, who's averaging 22 points a game, 11 rebounds, 11 assists, 2.5 steals, leading the league in steals per game. He's having a pretty down year in that I think he's shooting 41% from the field and like something like 30% from three, which is obviously really bad. He's taking a ton of shots. He's taking about 18 shots per game, I believe. So a little bit less than usual, but still bad to be shooting those percentages and shooting that many shots. But again, he is averaging the triple-double, and I got to put him in here. Next, Damian Lillard. He's averaging 26 points a game for the Blazers. They're the 3 seed, I believe, in the West. Or no, they're the 4 seed, but still having a really good season. They're in position to have home court advantage in the playoffs, and he's once again putting up great numbers. Okay, let's see here. Now for the and then DeMar DeRozan, he's averaging I think like 23 points a game for the Spurs, shooting 46% from the field. He's averaging like 5 rebounds, 5 assists a game, so pretty standard. And then the Spurs are I think the 5 seed now, the 6 seed, which is impressive to me because a lot of people thought they wouldn't even make the playoffs this year. I did think that they'd make the playoffs, but a lot of people didn't. So that being said, I have him in here just because the Spurs are basically defying expectations and doing better than people thought that they would. Okay, so now for front court players, I have Nikola Jokic. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. He's averaging like something like 16 points a game, 11 rebounds, and like 6 assists. He's a center who's a triple-double threat, which is super impressive. Nuggets have the second best record in the West. They're like a half game back of the Warriors. They've been leading the West for most of the year. So this is a pretty easy pick. He's had a pretty impressive season. So he's not hard to choose here. Next, I have Paul George, who's setting a career high in points per game. I think he's averaging 26 points per game this year. He's the front runner for Defensive Player of the Year, so you got to give it to him there. Again, pretty easy pick here. Next pick I have is Karl Anthony Towns of the Minnesota Timberwolves. He's averaging something like, I think, 23 points a game, 12 rebounds, pretty good shooting numbers. Not too bad in assists. I think he's around 3 or 4 a game. If it's 4, it's impressive. If it's 3, it's inconsequential. But he's had a pretty solid season. Okay, and then my last forward pick is probably the most controversial, but it's going to be Tobias Harris and not Luka Doncic, and I'll explain that in a second. But Tobias Harris is averaging 21 points a game, shooting 50% from the field and 44% from 3. He's shooting like 17 or 16 shots per game, so it's not like it's a fluke. He's actually taking a substantial amount of shots, and his sample size is pretty high, so it's not like this is just a flash in the pan. He's actually playing super well. But yeah, and he's leading the Clippers to currently a playoff team, which nobody thought they'd be. A lot of people thought they'd win like 35 games or something, but they're on pace to be above 500 and be in the playoffs, which is super impressive. As for the snubs, of course, Luka Doncic, Derrick Rose, Devin Booker, and then Klay Thompson are who I have as my snubs on here. Klay Thompson basically just hasn't been playing up to his usual standards. His 3-point percentage is quite a bit lower than it usually is. Yes, he's had like the 2 or 3 games where he scores like 50 or 60 points and shoots great, but for the rest of the season, he's actually been somewhat underwhelming for what we usually expect from him. So I've left him off here. Rudy Gobert, I debated between him and Karl Anthony Towns. Gobert is obviously always a great defensive presence, and he's actually averaging a career high in points per game at 16. I think he's averaging like 16 and 12 this season. But ultimately, I think Towns is just the better player, and he's had the better season, so I put him in. As far as Tobias Harris over Luka Doncic, which I feel like a lot of people will lash back at, yes, Luka's been impressive, but like if you just look at their statistics straight up, like Tobias Harris beats Luka in every category except for assists. Like shooting percentage, I think Luka's like 44% from the field or 43%. Tobias Harris is 50%. And now keep in mind, these guys basically play the same position, like small forward, and they're the best player on their teams. Um, so 50 for Tobias, 43 for Luka. 3-point percentage, Tobias is shooting 44%, Luka is shooting 38%. So again, goes to Tobias. Rebounds, I think Luka's like around 6 or 7, and Tobias has 8, so he wins that. And then assists, I think Luka's at like 6 and Tobias is at like 4. So then Luka wins that. But yeah, and then points per game, Luka's at 18 or 19, I think. And then Tobias is at 21, so he beats him there too. Team success, Luka Doncic has them in the mix, but they are still like the 13 seed in the West. And although it's not even separated by that many games, the Clippers are currently the 8 seed, so that is higher. They have a winning record, unlike the Mavericks. And I think there's like a comparable talent base there on each team. So Luka's probably my biggest snub, but I have him as not an all-star, and I have Tobias Harris as an all-star. As far as Devin Booker, I just can't put him on there basically just because the team is god awful. He is averaging like 25 points a game, but he's shooting only like 43 or 44% from the field, which isn't great. And you can't be in last place in the West with a terrible record and expect to be an all-star. And then as far as Derrick Rose, he's having a really good year, 19 points per game, 48% from the field, 44% from three. I think something like 4 rebounds a game and 5 assists a game. But then you look at that, okay, 19 points, 48% from the field, 44% from three. Is he playing better than Westbrook? Because that's the only one you could argue. Because I would say Damian Lillard is definitely playing better than him. And I would say DeMar DeRozan's playing better than him too. Um, People are only thinking that Rose should be an all-star just because his play is so much better than it was like last year. But like honestly, if you compare, like I think it's a phenomenal season. 44% from three is super impressive, but is 19, 5 and 4 better than 22, 11 and 11 from Westbrook? I would argue no. Damian Lillard giving you like 26, 7 and 4 or 5 rebounds a game. Is that better than Derrick Rose's 19, 5 and 4? Yes. Um, and then DeMar DeRozan averaging like 22 points a game, 5 and 5. Is that better than Derrick Rose's 19, 4 and 5? Yes. And then you look at all their team successes. Russell Westbrook, Damian Lillard, and DeMar DeRozan all have their teams in the playoff hunt. And the Timberwolves are they're not in the playoff picture right now. They're like the 10 seed in the West. And while Derrick Rose has been really instrumental to helping them do well, he hasn't been as good as these 3 guys. And, you know, I'm not hoping that one of them gets injured, but if one of them does, I'm sure that he'd be the first guy to replace them. But as it stands right now, I don't really think he deserves to be an all-star just because the West is so heavily crowded at the guard spot. But if he was in the East, I think he'd for sure be an all-star. Like if he was in the East, he could probably beat out like Victor Oladipo right now, or even Bradley Beal. But he's not, so I have him not making the All-Star game. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, if you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments. I'd be glad to hear from you, and I hope you guys have a good day. Bye.